If you were somebody who was concerned about Biden's new Ministry of Truth, the Disinformation Governance Board, well, don't be. Turns out she's going to be neutral. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas went out on Sunday during the Fox News shows and said, oh, no, nothing to be worried about. It's going to be to help free speech. And the person in charge, the woman you see here, going to be perfectly neutral. We're going to take a look at his statement here on CNN, where he was hitting the Sunday shows. Benny Johnson shared this one. Josh Hawley, senator, came out, sent a letter over to the Department of Homeland Security. We're going to take a look at that. And then we'll go back to this issue of neutrality. Is she really going to be neutral? We've got several different clips. You can just see poking around on Twitter. Very interesting woman with a very interesting background. And so we've got a lot to get to today. Let's start off with Mayorkas telling America that Miss Jankowicz is going to be neutral as she unveils her reign upon America. Here it is.
Your decision, the administration's decision to choose Nina Jankowicz to lead this disinformation board. They say she is not somebody who is neutral. Your response?
Eminently qualified, a renowned expert in the field of disinformation. Absolutely so.
Absolutely so. She says, and neutral.
A renowned expert in the field of disinformation. Absolutely so.
All right. Well, let's see about that. Here is a tweet that was posted out. We started the show. Here is at leftism4u on Twitter. Elon's Twitter says, in a video after January 6th, the Ministry of Truth's director at Wikipedia, which is very clever. She's Jankowicz, so she's Jankowikipedia, very intelligent, clever, and spunky and fun, talks about speaking before the House Intel Committee and admits to believing in disinformation, like the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, which was fake, not guilties. FBI conducted the whole thing and they couldn't even get convictions on it. And then also black voters being suppressed. And let's listen to this one here. This is our new steward of information. Let's listen to her.
That disinformation.
Let's start at the beginning.
As somebody who studies disinformation, yesterday was really tough. I kept thinking about how in October I testified before the House Intelligence Committee, and I told them that disinformation was dismantling democracy.
Oh, really?
But I was challenged to provide examples of how that was happening. I talked about how Gretchen Whitmer was nearly kidnapped because of
Fake. Nearly kidnapped because of disinformation. The FBI plotted that whole stinking hoax.
Information and incitement to violence online.
Fake.
And I talked about the suppression of black voters. And I talked about how malign actors like Russia are using disinformation to tear us apart and polarize our society. Even
Michael Sussman got indicted. We've been covering it for months now. The whole thing was fake. The whole thing was a hoax, including the Steele dossier. So that is 2 for 2. Big stories. Specifics. She's gotten wrong. Let's go back to it.
Further. But yesterday's violence in the U.S. Capitol is the starkest example yet that disinformation is not just dank memes or silly TikTok videos. It actually has real life effects, not only on the functioning of our republic, but on public safety. So please take some care before you share.
That's America's new informational czar. Going to be dictating what is real and not real, what's information and truth, what's not information, disinformation, misinformation. She just shared 2 pieces of disinformation, that the Russian hoax was involved in some sort of derailment of democracy. All that was overblown, has been confirmed. She also brought up the Governor Whitmer plot, also clearly orchestrated by the FBI. Many not guilty verdicts out of that entire plot. So she's going to now be the purveyor of truth. Already bought into 2 major hoaxes. Both of those hoaxes were, of course, purveyed by the Democrats, proffered forward by their team. Here's another clip from Jankowicz. Quote, democracy isn't possible without authoritative sources of information. And they're the purveyors of that info. They get to establish what that means and control it. And then they, as the little puppet masters, get to control the puppets and govern democracy however they see fit because they define the terms. Very powerful.
Focused so much on, pushing back against Russian disinformation online. We've lost sight of the fact that our own government, and certainly President Trump himself, has dealt in disinformation and normalized disinformation over the past 4 years, to the extent that there is no disincentive for most politicians to traffic in it anymore. And this, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, should not be a partisan issue. Democracy isn't possible without authoritative sources of information focused so much on
what a joker. So she wants, I guess, a treatise, some sort of encyclopedia that you go to, and she just opens it up and says, well, I told you so. It's right here in this document. And this is what the truth is. And this is the authority. And we dictated what it is. So it's the end of history. There's no more debate or philosophy. All of the rules, all of the ideas, all of the thought processes have been flushed out. You can't challenge your government. You can't challenge the status quo. If any gigantic 3-letter agency comes out and dictates something, we all got to just shove it down our gullets and act like good little sheep for whatever length of time that policy is appropriate until they change it, and then it's not misinformation or disinformation. It's just science modified itself miraculously. Weird. So, you know, this sort of thing keeps going on and on and on. And people like her say that they use these words, right? They're repurposing the words that used to have meaning, like democracy, to change it into something that it isn't. And she becomes the authority. They create the board. They shove her on there and they get excited about it. Let's see what else we've got here. This is something that you've probably seen already, but let's watch it one more time over from the Columbia Bugle. This was played over on Tucker Carlson. If you're hungover on a Monday, don't listen to this.
It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie when Rudy Giuliani shared that intel from Ukraine.
Oh, so she's very one-sided. Is that neutrality? Rudy Giuliani. Let's see if she talks about Hillary's emails.
Or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain. They're laundering disinfo and we really should take note and not support their
That's disinfo. Okay.
lies with our wallet, voice or vote. Oh!
Over on Twitter, Chuck Ross now, we have him saying that he found a policy paper from Miss Jankowicz that says that she's got an idea on how to solve this problem, how they can handle these complaints. And he actually took a clip of it. The website is over here at techpolicy.press. If you click over, it's an article that says Nina Jankowicz on how to be a woman online, published April 21, 2022. In the opening of her book, researcher and author crafts an allegory of a woman going about her day, encountering creepy and threatening men in public, and it recounts a morning commute on a cloudless morning, and that's when things get dark. It's for women, how to survive being online, surviving abuse, and all of the horrific things. And so this is an interview from Nina Jankowicz. Now, Chuck Ross did the heavy lifting on this, went over and already clipped out exactly what we need to read, what's pertinent here. And his context is saying Nina Jankowicz wants to, quote, upskill police officers to handle online abuse complaints. So in addition to solving racial strife in America, as many people were demanding police officers do now. Remember, I think it was in Portland or over there in Seattle, where they said, in addition to being a police officer, you're responsible for correcting 200 years of racial discrimination in America. Get out there and do your job. And the police were like, what? How about we don't work here anymore? And they didn't. They left. So now Nina is going to put them in charge of online abuse complaints. Is what they're going to have to go over to people. And did you send an instant message to Johnny? And Johnny's, Sally's going to say, no, I didn't send anything. And Johnny's officer is going to say, I have your Instagram right here. I can see it. Sally, you're in deep trouble. She compares online harassment to street harassment and thinks police should intervene equally in both situations. That's who's in charge. Singing Janky. Here's what she says. So we need some structure around that. We need to at least upskill police officers and local law enforcement to deal with these things and perhaps start some collaboration. Great. In the UK, they're looking at making the content that they call awful but lawful illegal. I think that we need to think about that as well, because again, going back to the comparative situation, if I were walking down the street and there were a bunch of men yelling these slurs at me, the police would intervene. I could get a restraining order against these people who are coming back again and again to say these things to me online. That just doesn't exist yet. So I'm hopeful for that architecture to come into play. So guys like me who are calling her singing Janky, we're in deep trouble. I expect to be served with a restraining order from this disinfo Nazi here soon. All right, so we got some more from Nina. This is the rest of the article, and you can read the rest of that. Now, a big question, of course, that many of us have is, is this new Disinformation Board governance czar, the Ministry of Truth leader, is she going to come out and disavow the prior disinformation that she spread? Because we've talked about here in the last video on this topic that she was actually promoting the idea that was proffered forward by our 50-something so-called intelligence official morons, former CIA people, that all came out, signed this big letter with blue ink, and they said, hey, it's official, that we think that Hunter Biden and this story about this laptop is Russian disinfo. They all came out and signed it. Turned out they were all wrong because they have no information or intelligence at all. But they were very, very unequivocal about this in the month leading up to the election. So the question, of course, now, since they came out with that, since Mayorkas and his party were the ones who proffered that forward, since people like, who was it? Oh, Jen Psaki, yeah, the White House press briefing secretary. She came out and also was proffering that forward. Turns out they were all wrong. Now, we know that Singing Janky was somebody who also proffered that forward. And now that she's in charge of actual disinformation, is she going to do anything about it? Rescind any of that? I doubt it. But let's see here what Mayorkas, who's now in charge of all of this, he is the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. He gets asked about this specifically. Are you going to disavow? Here's what he says.
Dossier disinformation?
It's not for me to opine on that.
Americans in general, was the Steele dossier disinformation?
It's not for me to opine on that.
You're the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. You're just somebody who installed and launched the first Disinformation Governance Board in American history. It is kind of in your purview to opine on that, but we're not going to get any more information. The Senate is responding. We have at least one senator who cares. There was another one who we talked about last time was Ron Johnson. He fired a letter like this out of the gate. But Josh Hawley is here. He is over from Missouri, and he is here, an actual lawyer. So he sent a letter over to DHS. He says, the administration that activated the FBI against parents at schools now has a government disinformation board to monitor American speech. He says, it's a disgrace. Joe Biden and Secretary Mayorkas dissolve this monstrosity immediately. Let's see what his letter says. It is out on April 28th. It says, Dear Secretary Mayorkas, I'm writing with grave concern. I confess, at first, when I heard this announcement, I thought it was satire. Certainly no American administration could ever, in good judgment, do something like this, but I was mistaken. Rather than protecting our border, you've chosen to make speech your priority, and this new board is certainly unconstitutional and must be dissolved immediately. For well over a year, your department has consistently treated competing policy views as disinformation. Yes, we all lived through that. If you questioned what they were doing, you were killing grandma, we know. However, political debates on issues such as immigration, pandemic lockdowns, and foreign policy clearly constitute core political speech, all protected by the Constitution and the First Amendment. The apparent broad mandate of this new government entity to, quote, coordinate countering misinformation undermines the argument that it can even exist consistent with the Constitution. We've got troubling issues that popped up with Singing Jankowicz, a supposed, quote, expert with a long history of partisan attacks. A few of those highlighted for us by Holly says, in 2020, she described Trump's use of the National Guard as, quote, a sentence I expect to hear from leaders of authoritarian countries, not the president of the United States. Partisan. In 2021, she quoted with praise an article that said, quote, homegrown fascism predated Donald Trump. She also said, America systemically racist. She also said, in response to revelations about Hunter Biden's laptop, that 50 former NatSec officials and 5 former CIA head idiots that believe the laptop is a Russian influence op. She didn't talk about the idiot part. Trump says, Russia, Russia, Russia. And remember, she was saying that you've got all of these experts, 50 former national security officials, 5 former CIA heads, all of them legitimate. Trump's over here just Russia, Russia, Russia. Holly's letter continues, says that Jankowicz has said that the new board will, quote, maintain the department's commitment to protecting free speech. Holly says this is ironic, especially given Jankowicz's extensive criticism of free speech and the First Amendment. Says that she claimed the free speech versus censorship framing is, quote, a false dichotomy. And we covered that tweet. And when Elon announced his acquisition of Twitter, she said, quote, I shudder to think about if free speech absolutists were taking over more platforms, what that would look like for marginalized communities, which are already shouldering disproportionate amounts of this abuse. Jankowicz has even described opponents of social media speech codes as, quote, First Amendment zealots, you free speech lunatics. These statements that question the value of free speech are obviously disqualifying for such a role, obviously. While Democrats have for years controlled public square through big tech allies, Musk's acquisition of Twitter is making you all pee your panties. While Democrats for years have controlled the public square through their big tech allies, Musk's acquisition of Twitter has made you lose your minds. It can only be assumed that the sole purpose of this new Disinformation Governance Board will be to marshal the power of the federal government and censor conservative and dissenting speech. It's dangerous, un-American. The board should immediately be dissolved. Therefore, I want answers on this by May 4, 2022. How will this Disinformation Board function? Who exactly will it be monitoring? Number two, what analysis did DHS conduct to ensure that the Disinformation Board and its activities comport with the First Amendment? It's still amazing they picked that name. What a terrible name. Why did, typically in these things, they call it, you know, like Homeland Security. That's why they call it the Department of Homeland Security, not the Department of Strip You of Your Civil Liberties. It should be something like Preserving Free Speech in America Committee, something like that. There we go. Well, that sounds great. I love free speech in America. Why did DHS time its announcement directly after Musk's acquisition of Twitter? Great question. And who appointed Jankowicz to head the board as the director? Was that you, Mayorkas? Did you listen to her TikToks and like her? Were you aware of the history of the partisan conduct of this woman before you appointed her? And the answer to that is obviously, which is why she got appointed. Number five, has the DHS conferred with any private social media company in the creation or the operation of this board? Do you have a back end? Is Facebook and Zuckerberg already just funneling information over to you so you have databases of who you're looking for? Who knows? Josh Hawley, the latest senator to demand answers from the Department of Homeland Security. But, you know, Mayorkas was out there, said she's eminently qualified. Perfect. She can sing beautifully, love the high octaves, and she's also somebody who is neutral. All that other stuff, forget about that. Besides, we need an authoritative source in democracy. Otherwise, we'll get confused. We don't know where to get information. We can't think for ourselves. And so we need somebody like this to help guide us along. Fortunately, I'm looking forward to thinking a lot less and having Miss Jankowicz jank my mind all over the place right into the truth. I'm sure you're looking forward to that too. I hope so. If you want to join us as we continue to cover this insanity, I hope you hit that subscribe button before you get out of here, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.